Okay, Gil, I think we're ready for the bracha over Torah study. So we'll all say it together. Baruch
atah Adonai Eloheinu asher
Are you universe? Gift with us with your wisdom and coming to Torah. Amen. So apologies that people's videos need to be off today for security reasons. Feels like it adds to the sadness of the moment, but hopefully Torah will lift us up. So today we're doing Cain and Hevel, Cain and Abel. And we just want to acknowledge, obviously the sadness of this moment. And we're here to study Torah, which of course is going to relate to what happens, to what is happening in Israel. But we're also not here for a political discussion because we don't know, we can't really create the container for that right now. So I'm going to ask everybody to focus on the text. I hope that makes sense. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Host disabled participant screen sharing.
Yep, just a second.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, so we're doing Cain and Abel. Complicated and tragic story that in a sense sets the tone, at least for much of Genesis, if not for the entire Torah, and we'll reflect that in a little while. I'll begin reading the first text and we'll discuss a little bit their names and you can take it from there. So we're in Genesis 4, and if you recall, Adam and Chava were kicked out of the garden for disobeying God's prohibition, God's first commandment, not to eat from the tree of knowledge, and they did, and they were punished with all kinds of things, and then they were kicked out of the garden. And here we are outside the garden, and here's what happens. Va'adam yadat chava ishto. Now the human, or Adam, knew his wife Eve sexually. Vatahar vatiled Cain, and she became pregnant, and she gave birth to a son named Cain. But I have gained or acquired a person with the help of Adonai. But Tosef laledet et achiv et Havel. He Hevel ro'et son, v'Cain haya oved Adama. She then bore his brother Hevel. Hevel became a keeper of sheep, and Cain became a tiller of the soil. So the names Cain and Hevel are so interesting. I've seen Hevel translated as vapor, as ephemerality. And recently I came across another understanding of the word Hevel from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, may his memory be a blessing, as shallow breath, which is interesting and in contrast to neshama or ruach, which is breath, the words that refer to soul in Hebrew, which also indicate breath. And in many traditions, the word soul and breath are connected. But here we have possibly shallow breath. And Cain means to acquire. So they're really polar opposites, right? Like, what is ephemeral and what is to like grasp, possess, hold. Honeh also means, also refers to creator. Like God is referred to as Honeh Shamayim Ba'aretz, creator of heavens and earth. Anything else?
Yeah, I also think that in these two verses, like you have, first of all, the verb to know, which will come back also towards the end of the story. Again, like there's a knowing here that is, of course, the tree of knowledge of good and evil is the first time knowledge is used. And so there's something beautiful about verse 1, like that is knowledge here is a kind of knowledge that is instructive and beautiful and generative, right? And at the same time, we'll see later in the story, like that there's a way that knowing is undone also. The kind of knowing here, like that is there's a knowing that births and a knowing that kills. There's another way of saying that. There's a kind of idea. I also think that the Torah is smart here in its use in verse 2 of there's no reason to say that Batosef Laledet at the Achiv, the Hevel is already defined as Cain's brother. As if to signal to us already in verse 2 that the primary motive of the story is to underscore the brotherhood and then the fact, like the eventual fratricide. It's like,
so interesting.
it's like, why does his brother, like, she got pregnant again and gave birth to Hevel. Like, we know that by definition, it's his brother, right? So why does the Torah have to go and say, he's his brother? Because that is the primary purpose of Hevel. Hevel is already, from the moment that he is born, Cain's brother, and that's the problem too.
That's the primary identity.
The primary problem.
The primary problem.
Right.
Also, their professions, I'm also noticing, reflect their names, because Hevel is a shepherd. So, a shepherd's always moving with their flocks, and a Cain, works the ground.
Totally. And also, like, I was also struck by the first word in the diptych is Adam, right? Adam, and the last word is Adama, which is the same letters, by the way. Adama, Adam, and Adama are the same letter. Just the hey is at the end and the hey is at the beginning. And it's as if he's like, I'm dad's boy, right? I'm like my father is from the earth, and I'm also from the earth. And he's also the Bechor, he's also the elder son, which is like there's a lot here of his expectation and maybe even entitlement to reap the rewards of what it is to be the firstborn of the father. And
a lot here wants to acquire and keep.
Preserve, and conserve, right? It's like hold that.
Grass.
Right. And so the eventual rejection here is even more profound in some way.
Okay, we're going on. We're in source 2, everybody. So, as time went on, Cain brought an offering to God, to Adonai, from the fruit of the soil, right? Very simple, short verse. Now let's compare it with the next verse. The Hevel Hevi Gamhu, and also Hevel brought Mi Bicharot Sono, from the firstborn of his sheep, Umi Chelvehem, from the choices. Is there another way to translate Chelvehem?
The fat, right?
I know the fat, so the fattest of the sheep. Interesting. Vayisha Adonai. So God turned to Hevel, the El Minchata. God turned to Hevel and to his offering. The El Kayin, the El Minchata, and to Kayin and to his offering, Losha. God did not turn. Vayicha l'Kayin od. Kayin, they're upset about this. Vayitnu Anav, and his face fell. Vayomer Adonai el Kayin, Lama charalach. Why are you upset? Why are you angry? The Lama nafli panecha, and why did your face fall? Hello in Shekev Se'et. Isn't it true that if you do well, if you do good, you will be lifted up? The imlo tetev, you do not do good. La petach patat rovates. At the opening, sin will crack. The elecha teshukato, And to you is its desire, va'ata, timsholo, and you will rule over it. What a statement on sin, right?
Don't take him for.
That little fragment, yeah.
Is it a
It
poem?
has a rhythm, it has a poetic rhythm.
It certainly moves into poetic language.
I think in Everett Fox translation, if I'm not mistaken, he like depicts it in poetic, I guess, orthographic expression, like it's like has a measured rhythm. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a rhythm there.
I just want to point out
Yeah.
that the couple things on those verses. Like, first of all, from verse 1 already, it's clear that Cain's choice is not, it's clear that the text wants us to know that Cain didn't bring the choice of his fruits. I mean, that, I think, Mitri Adama, Mitcha does not, right? The fact that verse 4 goes out of its way to give more adjectival, more descriptors, like, the verse wants us to know there's something about Hevel offering that would recommend it if this were a competition. Odd that it is. It's why should this be a
Well,
competition?
Hevel selects.
Right,
Hevel seems to consciously select, but there's intentionality in verse 4.
right. That's exactly it. And also the words, the phrase, I'm been fascinated forever by these two words together, gamhu, him too. It appears in the Aesop Jacob story at like, especially around the blessing from Isaac, gamhu, like me too, like gamhu.
Like he created space for himself.
Either create space for himself or in competition with his older brother, like that's like me too, I also want to.
Yeah.
Like there's a way to frame this as both, like he was inspired by his brother, which would also be recommended, or it could be like he wanted to one up him, right? There's like an element there of, hey, look at me, Dad. I can do that, but I can do even better. That again, not saying which of those two. Also, the term like the way that the phrase for turning towards is very interesting. Like it is, isn't it? Vayesha, lo sha'a. That's not the typical phrase for turning towards something in biblical Hebrew. In fact, it's the only place, as far as I know, in the Torah where that is used. Right, to turn towards something is lishnot, is to face it. Here it's sha'a, which has, I've heard beautiful Torah on that too, but like sha'a here is odd. And also God's response again.
Wait, let's say more about the word sha'ah. So
Yeah.
sha'ah also means hour, right? So is God not giving kind the time of day
Mhm.
and giving Hevel the time of day? And it's interesting because the whole passage from verse 3 begins with
Exactly, like he indicates the mean. Exactly.
right, and sha'ah, means to as an hour turns, as time turns.
It's really
Fascinating.
It's fascinating. It's totally fascinating.
But it's true, who you give time to is who you favor. I don't have any time for you. I don't have any time for you.
I have time for you.
I have no time for you. I have time for you.
You're right, exactly. I have time for you. Right, I have time for you. Yeah, I think it's like
It's like elemental.
it is elemental here. And then lastly, I just think Leslie on this, and I see that hand up.
Yeah, we could do that.
Like, so I just, God's response, obviously, is something that we should interrogate, because not only is it, before we even turn to like what God actually says, the content of it is just like an odd, God asks kind of question, but he doesn't really wait for an answer. It's a rhetorical question that would have been best served had it not been rhetorical, maybe. Like, really, I want to know what's bothering you. Why do you look so sad? Like, that would have been great to have heard a response from Cain and have him
Not a great
articulate it.
therapist here.
Not a great therapist, not a great parent, not a great therapist.
Not a great parent.
Not a great parent, therapist.
The setting up of sibling rivalry.
Right. Now,
God sets it up.
Just by the Torah every week.
I know. Now, I think it might be instructive that again, like maybe we should have framed this as of course, not a story. This will always plague us when we have these conversations about Torah. Is the Torah descriptive or prescriptive in what measurement? Because one could have argued that culture could have been constructed differently had the Torah and its power been more prescriptive and had a story here that would be like, oh, this is the way it usually is, but here's how it should be. Right, but that's very fanciful to imagine that way. I think the Torah here being extremely, like most myth, describing human nature, and sibling rivalry is not introduced here. It's described.
Well,
And
it's
it's
literature
depicted.
that mirrors the world,
Exactly.
humanity, and created humanity,
Exactly. So I think that
and offers us medicine for it as well.
in some ways, those of us who love justice and love the underdog should love this text because it works against primogeniture. Like Cain should have, on some level, been received just because he was Cain. He was Ish Adamah, his father to Adam, and he's Adamah man. But he's not, because he doesn't bring what's best, as it were. This is the kind of lifting up of meritocracy. Of course, I'll give you the time of day, but bring what you have. And make sure that it's the best that you can do and not just what you dial in. Maybe I'm just
But I want to focus on verse 7 for a minute. So what does this mean? Because I never understood it. Hello in tete. So if you do well, if you do good,
by the way, Tetiv is like interesting. Like
Tetiv, yeah.
why is it called
right? What you're told, but it already echoes Genesis 1, right? So the in tete se. So if you do good, or if you bring goodness, there is uplift. Not I will uplift. I will lift you up. There is
Right.
uplift.
right?
So what does it mean to do good? Because I really want to know. Because this sin crouching at the door is like a lifelong trouble, right? It's like it's an issue,
All of us.
right?
And why does God
Like, how do
frame
we
this?
spell the sin that's crouching at the door? Like, what is this telling us?
And why is it relevant here? Like, what is like the assumption about what Cain has done is
What's Cain's sin?
right.
Cain wasn't intentional. That's interesting. Like Cain was not doing his best to raise it up for God. And maybe not giving it time, go back to time. Yeah, okay. All right, we're gonna open it up to comments. I just want to remind people that we're sticking to the text today because we haven't created a container to discuss what's happening in the Middle East. And even though these texts, will speak to that, we're not discussing the matzah, the situation directly, in order to sort of have a coherent and conversation that reflects shalom bayit, right? The peace within the community. Okay, Beth. I think you can unmute Beth. Is that true, Gil?
Yes, I just was allowed to. Shabbat Shalom. I wanted to offer Robert Alter's translation for verse 7.
Thank you.
Robert Alter translates it as, "Why are you incensed? And why is your face fallen? For whether you offer well or whether you do not, at the tent flap sin crouches, and for you is its longing, but you will rule over it." So not quite what we're given here in this Separia translation. God seems to be saying to Cain that he's going to face the same issues whether he offers well or he doesn't. And that he's still going to have to fight his impulses.
Interesting. Thank you. Yeah,
Like whether you're satisfied or not satisfied, either way, your mind will be your challenge. Or get what you want, don't get what you want,
yeah.
you'll still struggle either way.
Okay, Mark Allen Horn says, Abel brings the firstborn, Cain is the firstborn. Oh, interesting. So there's something going on here. Also, God is predictive in altar, but not in thought. That's what Paul says. Okay, Rachel Mackler.
What is meant by God paid heed to Abel and paid no heed to Cain?
So that was
How
our
does God-
discussion of the word sha'ah before, which turn to, which also reflects time. Go ahead.
So in human terms, if I am one of these brothers, how do I know that God is paying heed to me physically?
That's a great question.
Yeah,
The question is not answered in the text.
yeah, that's weird, huh?
No,
No, okay.
many questions are not answered in the text, which is why we're here. You want to say anything? What does it mean? I guess it was, it sounds like it was experiential, but I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things in the mythology of the first couple chapters of the book that I, like what, like God was walking in the garden. God was walking in the garden in the heat of the day, like, I don't know what that means. So here, I think that it's a great question because later on in the Torah, we do have signals that God has accepted an offering in some way, like a fire will come out of heaven or a voice, or there's like some pleasing odor, all of which none of it I understand, but like here, there's not even an indicator, like God, I've received it, your Amazon package has arrived, picture, DoorDash door.
Cain
But somehow this.
stated that.
Exactly. What's most important for this is that Cain knows that it wasn't that seed.
Right.
Right, you don't want, which is again, as many have argued sociologically, that the roots of violence are in rejection.
By the way, could Cain have been wrong?
Right, so that's another question, was maybe he was like, it seems that God, like that's the question, right, of verse 7. Is God saying why?
Translation.
And Robert Alder's translation is
Nice.
like, it's beautiful. Maybe Cain, like, how do you know? Is God saying, how do you know that I rejected your offering? Like on a prima facie, like the first translation here, where like it seems that whoever translated, I don't know who it was, maybe yes or whomever, seems to be like working with the assumption that God does indeed affirm you're right. I rejected you, but there's a reason I rejected you, right?
Well, the Torah is telling us, like the omniscient narrator is telling us, it's not only Cain's interpretation.
Right. God is now confirming what Cain has interpreted. But in Alter's translation, I think there is room to ask that beautiful question, which is,
He's wrong.
which runs the risk though of making someone feel crazy, because in other words, like,
No, I-
in other words, not just that, like, you seem to be rejecting me, God, and God says, well, that's just your interpretation. Right? It's like talk about being gaslit, like whatever you did to my brother, you didn't do it to me. And God's like, and Cain's like, no, man, like it's not working. Like you can't get out of this. You're really rejecting me. And God's like, well, I think it's not about you, it's about me. No. So I think that there's room to ask that, I think, here. But
repeat the altar translation. Would you?
Repeat the all, I don't have it. I think it
Well,
was Beth read
We
it.
can't-
for
we
us.
can't. Beth, can you put it in the chat? If easy, if not, don't worry about it. Okay, so we have, do you wanna?
I mean, sure, I guess now we're gonna actually look at a couple of sources that are struggling, like, as we are, from a long time ago. Oh, she has to type it, so it's gonna be hard for her to type it.
Don't worry about it.
Don't worry. So this is Ibn Ezra. People knew Abraham Ibn Ezra. He was a great medieval commentator. And also, I just will say parenthetically, made his living as people know how Ibn Ezra made his living. He certainly didn't make it as a rabbi. Does anybody know how he made a living? He was a professional, hold your hats, astrologer. Wrote 4 books on astrology. I have it. So anyway,
What year?
he's in the end of the 12th century and 13th century, contemporaneous with like Ramban and
Wow.
Rambam, Rashi, about 100 years after Rashi or so, traveled itinerant, moved around everywhere. His commentary on the Torah includes what he believed was the esoteric astrological understanding of the Torah. Reads like the whole Exodus narrative as a war against Ares or the lamb, the god of Egypt, and so on. So it's very fascinating. He didn't know about the outer planets. That's true. Mark Horn, he did not. Hatat Rovetz. He writes on the phrase "sin crouches." That phrase, by the way, rovetz. Where does rovetz appear?
The forming thing.
Rovate Adam.
Rovet, yeah, swarming is. What did you say?
Rovate Adam.
Yeah, the beginning and then.
No. Rovetzet is ein rovetzet ala. There's I think in with
Words.
birds, right? Rovetzet, crouch. So chatat rovetz, v'hanachon be'enai, and what seems to be the interpretation is that chatat samuch, that sin, the word sin here is samuch v'yetzer lev adam hu rovetz imo. In sin crouches, the door is in the construct, and it is the impulse of man's heart that crouches within or crouches with him. Meaning, later in the Torah it says that God says Yetzer lev adam ra min urav, that the human being has an evil impulse within them from the time
It's structural.
it's structural,
Right,
right?
it's part
It's part
of
of who we are.
Yeah.
So that's the atat here. Is that which is in us. Not sure what he's doing here with his interpretation. But God is saying that which is crouching within you. It's not that sin. I see. So he's not saying that sin, as it were, it's like your behavioral sins. He's trying to say that what God is referring to is not that you act in a sinful way, but that you have an impulse in you called the Yetzer, which is a fundamental part of who you are. God's saying you have, it's part of who you are.
Right.
Right.
Rovetz is a construct.
It's in you.
Yeah.
It's a concept.
It's a hurrah.
It's a hurrah, exactly.
Okay.
But it's nearby, about to complete the door.
And the door is maybe, what is the door? Is the door of the heart, the door of the mind? What door?
I think it's
Fascinating,
that voice that says he rejected me.
right?
That's what the door- and we all have that crouching, doesn't
The
stop.
desire for vengeance. or
No,
desire
our
to get
own
back.
self-criticism.
No, yeah, Devorah's saying something different. It's our own
Resentment,
self-criticism. It's
resentment.
always ready to
It's
pounce.
always ready to pounce on you. You're not enough. You're not.
You're not,
good
oh, that.
enough. You're
oh,
less than your
that's
brother.
right.
You're less than your
You're
brother.
less than.
And what if God, he wasn't saying that, we created it.
So what that voice does then is create the conditions for sin,
Yeah,
even though it's not identical with sin.
it stirs up rage, but it's not even true.
Resentment.
So when the Torah calls it sin, it's not that it is sinful, but it will lead, it's saying, like Rabbi Kolich is saying, it can lead you to sin. So it's almost like God's warning Cain right
Don't
now.
listen to
Be
that.
careful, don't listen to that voice, because it might lead you to do what you're about to do. Which is externalize it on the object that you perceive to be the
Voice.
one,
About yourself.
right, that is making you feel this way. I wish I would have tried to kill God.
Good luck.
Yeah, but that would have been healthier because it wasn't God, it wasn't Cain's fault. It wasn't Havel's fault.
No,
But the perception was it was Havel's fault. But like, why not take it to when we were really angry at him? But maybe for Cain, it was like
Too scary.
too scary, or for Cain, it was like, I wouldn't have had to, right, too scared to do that. And-
It's like, first the brother said your father.
Right,
Uh-huh.
which is like the ultimate, like Freud's,
Good.
many have said that this was like the difference between Freud and the Oedipal complex and the intergenerational conflict. We have intragenerational conflict, which we might say is a replacement for like the desire to kill. Like maybe Hevel said, Cain said, if Hevel hadn't come around, I would have had it all to myself. I wouldn't have to compete. I wouldn't have to feel the experience of being less than if I was the only one, which is a unique. I think every human being feels that way in some level. Like we want to be the whole universe. Somebody.
I'm an only child. I am the whole universe.
And you never have to worry. Why you're so healthy. I think that's it. I'm a twin. I'm exactly the opposite. Like, not only am I like exactly the opposite, it's not even like just that I have other siblings. I have a brother who's like my twin brother. So it's like the sense, and we see it with our own boys, like, Ken Wilber called this the Atman project, that every human being thinks that they are God. In a healthy way at some point in early childhood, right? They're
Until
like,
they're disabused.
right,
The question
hopefully,
is how.
exactly.
With
And
what
can they
form?
navigate that that shock that there's a world outside of their own narcissistic bubble.
Right, some of us spend the rest of our lives doing that. Some of us never. I didn't even do-
No, I know. Should we do the Ramban or we just keep talking? We want to do this, just the Ramban so we can move on to the next place, because I know there's.
Sure, go ahead. Go ahead.
Let me just do, I know, I see Rabbi Anisfeld in the hand up, and I really just want to hear her voice and also, and Elliot's voice too, but let's just do source 4 and then we can open up again before the next stage of this, of holy horror. Ve'elecha tshukato, which I loved Alter's translation. I remember something like, and it's, I forgot, it was a really beautiful phrasing. Ve'elecha tshukato, shehu yishtokek liot davek becha, kol hayamim. That this sin, or now in our understanding of the Ibn Ezra, like the Yetzer Hara wants to cleave to us at all times. Avalatatim sholbo, but however you will control him, them. Im tachpos, if you desire, ki tetiv dirachecha, v'tasireinu me'elecha. If you really want to, if you desire, you may mend your ways and remove it. Right? If you make your ways, if you improve your ways, you can remove it. And remove himself. Haru al hashuba shehi mituna biyado l'shuba kol eit. And so the Ramban here reads this as the chukah, your desire, its desire is to control you, but you can control it, meaning through improving your ways and having a desire to do tshuva, to make amends. You can also, you'll be forgiven. And so essentially reads this as a kind of tshuva move, that human beings can always improve themselves morally. They're not ultimately at the.
Like the original blueprint for Shuba.
For tshuva, yeah. Okay, so Rabbi Sharon, and then I think Elliot, and then.
Darren? You still there? Jill, do you see Rabbi Sharon Cohen-Anatol?
Yeah, I just
There we
asked
go.
you.
Sorry, I wasn't allowed to unmute or, can I start video also? Say hi. Yeah. Okay. Well, I was really resonating with hold on one sec. Okay. Here.
Yeah, we see you.
Hi. I was really resonating with the notion of hearing, the warning being about sort of that voice within you that is taking you to a place of, I'm being rejected, I'm less than, I'm not worthy, and the dangers, the dangers of where that can take you, and associating that with the Yetzer Hara. And I also just want to link it to what you were saying earlier about the descriptive nature of this, and particularly sort of part of what I hear in what God is saying is, or what the story is saying, is there will inevitably be moments where someone receives a blessing that you don't, where someone seems to be being affirmed in a way that you're not. And what do you do with that? Like in this sense, I don't totally blame God for this. I mean, yes, sometimes I read this story and I'm so frustrated with God, but sometimes I think, well, it's just the way it is. As soon as you're dealing, as you said, David, as soon as you're dealing with more than one human being, you're dealing with sort of, well, wait a minute, what are they getting that I'm not getting? And then what do we do with what comes up for us around that? So that's where I hear like the sin crouching at the door, when we cannot tolerate another person's bracha without feeling sort of, devastated by it. So devastated by it that we have to either destroy them or ourselves, something like that.
And that really receives its ultimate expression in Yaakov and Esav's devastation at not getting the bracha, like the bracha that he wanted. But it's such a huge question, like, how do we quiet those voices down? Like, that person has, I don't, which means I'm less than, or I don't count.
It's also strong because there's a part of me, thank you for that, Robert Hansel, I love, like, on the one hand, in that reading, there's a kind of countercultural, at least in the liberal world that I've lived in for so many decades now, like, there's a countercultural move here, which is there's something to be gained in healthy competition and in a meritocracy. Like, it's not useful for everyone to win and get a medal. Like, sometimes, like, that deprives us of the necessary ability to rise up and say that person won, they deserve it. And I'm like, I can be happy for them, or at least I can not be a sore loser. Like, I can learn to live in a world where I can handle the discomfort and the feelings that arise from having lost, right?
Yeah.
And there's something there,
I can still have value even though
that person won.
It's really tricky.
It's really tricky.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there's also a part of me that when I read this story, and I totally, again, like, I agree with everything you said, and also wonder out loud, why didn't God just accept both of them? Like in the Yaakov Esav story, right? At least on one level, it's so tragic for Esav that he didn't receive the blessing that he wanted. But he asked this really powerful question that could easily be asked here, which is, does my father only have one blessing? And I think that is also part of the tragedy of the story, which is, God, was it only enough? Why did God have more than one blessing?
Right.
So on the one hand, it's kind of, again, back to that conundrum of descriptive and prescriptive. Who knows how civilization might have changed had this story modeled a new way, where God said, I have room for both of you. And that maybe is a tall order to ask of the text. Maybe the text is just, maybe that would have forever reduced humanity to not achieving what it could have achieved, knowing that it had to try harder. Maybe trying harder is also one of the upshots of this text, right? That subtle dissatisfaction that creates a pearl. Who knows? Who knows? I don't know. But maybe.
Sharon, do you want to respond to that, or you want to?
Well, I can hear other people. I just said in the chat, I think it's, yes, it would be wonderful. Yes, we want a world where God can accept both. And I sort of, live in the world in a sense that God sort of does accept and hold all. But I just experienced some deep teaching here about, like, that part of what competition is teaching us to do, what I just wrote in the chat, is to practice. Like, we actually have to develop the muscles to learn how to lose and live with that. Just because, forget about things that have to do with merit. There will be in our lives times when things are going well for somebody else and not for us in a million ways. And if we can't live with that experience, it's just going to eat us up. So anyway, that's sort of existentially how this is landing for me this morning.
So I want to observe that there are a lot of hands, which is great. And we also still have a lot of text. So let's say, 7 minutes of comments, and then we'll do some more text. Okay. So Elliot was waiting.
Yeah, so a couple of things. Just, in terms of the question of, well, what if God had blessings for both, right? Well, then we wouldn't have a story.
How boring the Bible would be if there was like no pain and no favoritism and no violence. That wouldn't be much of a book.
We wouldn't be here.
Exactly.
And then also I remember Moshe's able to do it, right? He's able to not, be jealous and actually to be happy for Aaron. Okay, when Aaron is appointed the high priest.
Yeah.
And then just a quick question. sometimes I see couch and sometimes I see crouch. In terms of the translation, so. Any comment on that?
I think it's.
Seen couches at the door
I
and
don't know
seen
what I
couches.
saw. I thought it was a mistake, so I corrected it a few times. I think it should be crap,
Couch, I think. Okay, thank you.
because I don't know what couch.
It's an animal instinct.
Okay. All right.
So,
Yeah.
I have a question from a little bit different perspective. Why do you guys think that God does not kill Cain?
Well, we're not there yet.
Oh,
We'll get there in the
We'll get
story.
there, story. Let's get there.
Oh, okay.
We
We're
get
not
there.
there yet.
okay.
Hold back.
Okay.
Okay.
I was just going to comment that, assuming you don't have nothing but being pushed down, but you have a rather normal life, you learn how to actually rejoice in someone else's blessing. You really do. And it's part of the wonderful part of maturing,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say something along the same line. I mean, the pain of Cain is that his offering is rejected. I mean, it's true that there's a contrast which makes him feel bad, but he's not better off. He's not worse off because his brother's offering, because God turned to his brothers. That doesn't make him worse off. And in life, it's the same. You know, if somebody else gets the Nobel Prize and I didn't, I'm not worse off because somebody else has.
Well, what does that mean? Let's say your whole life you're trying to get a Nobel Prize.
It's what?
Let's say your whole life you're dedicated to getting a Nobel Prize. Aren't you worse off when you lose it? Or you don't?
If there's only one thing in life, if it would here it is, that's the way it's set up. There's one God, there's two offerings, there's two, and it's and Jacob and Esau is the same, but really, it doesn't have to be set up that.
Yeah,
It's set up.
which means there should be multiple models of success in society. Often I feel like there's just one narrow model of success.
Came to try again next time. It's not.
It was interesting. God didn't say that.
No, it's not. It's the way it's set up.
Yeah.
It's, it's not.
It's a setup.
It's a setup.
It is a setup, but like, you know, if you watch Mozart, if you ever, you know, the movie Mozart, Mozart was so brilliant and so on so many levels, but like Salieri's character in that movie, right, who played so brilliantly by Murray Abraham. You know, I learned that when I was acting. I learned that monologue that he had where he brings God to task for what he wanted was to be Mozart. What he wanted was to find favor in that way, and it killed him. And he then, in the movie, at least the way it was played out, was that he wound up taking it out on Mozart and let Mozart die, right, out of jealousy and envy. But it's so powerful, such a powerful, you know, theatrical and dramatic expression of this chatat. Like, there was only one, in his mind, one way to find favor in God's eyes, and to be the one who offered sublimity to God. And here there was Mozart, whose sublimity far surpassed Salieri's capacities. He was just unable to be what Mozart was. And Mozart, in his eyes, was a joke. Like, he looked at, he said, how could it be, you know, this imbecile, this, you know, this unethical, immoral, you know, at least the way it was played out. And I think that it's a very real emotion. I think that we all have it to some extent, and it's kind of a funny conversation. I think that Rabbi Gonasel said it best. It's a muscle, and it's most of the time there are almost no gyms for that muscle. There are no exercise equipment built around that in our culture, and it's
the gym. We're in the gym right now.
right now. It's super hard. It's super hard. Right? How many people walk away from open book wanting to have spoken, wondering why the rabbis chose you? You always choose him. You always choose her. I'm not even joking. Do you know how many times I've received emails from people that said, every time I speak, you turn to this person and, like, you know, and you say things like, wow, we literally have been taught pedagogically to be careful about certain comments that might be more insightful, say like, oh, that was such an insightful comment. And if somebody else says something and you don't say that, the person walks away going, I can't believe the rabbis didn't say that my comment was insightful.
saying it's really
I
important.
mean, let's be honest, we're being honest, right? We're being honest.
I think we're actually that sensitive.
Of course, we're not sensitive.
That's sensitive. We need legitimation.
We
We
need
need
constant affirmation and seeing, and want to see them, you didn't see me, what's wrong with me?
Especially if we have been rejected in the past by a parent.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're gonna move this on, one more comment, and we're gonna go back to the text. Look, oh, there's people back of us?
We can see.
Yeah.
So should this be a treatise on before the Messiah comes and after the Messiah comes?
Amen,
Mm,
could be.
Love that. Says everything. Okay,
You didn't say
Say
that.
to you.
I-
It's gonna be great.
Elizabeth, I've told you that I love your comments. That goes for all time.
I mean, today.
All right, so we're moving on, but I like Ben.
I think in the history of cottage, kind of getting at this tension also that they just spoke about, because I believe cottage was originally said only for very learned people, is when like a scholar, great scholar died. But then people said, well, who is to say that this person is a great scholar, only they deserve cottage. And so we started saying it for everybody, as if everyone was a great scholar, but that's not a meritocracy.
Wow, that's a mouth.
Could you imagine death having to make that distinction? Let's see,
Right.
this person worth kind.
Exactly, that's
So,
right, but that's,
yeah, that's the
I think
conversation.
that's that's the exact conversation. I think that's what it feels like.
Yeah.
If you don't have that affirmation.
And that means the competition never ends. Like you're on your deathbed and you're like, okay, please say cottage for me.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, and it cuts across even without bringing in the current conflict in an overt way, but it comes in often in terms of questions of who gets included and doesn't get included. Are we allowed to say, cottage only for certain people now and not mention other groups, and what does that mean? And this is a constant tension, I think, across the board. So we have some more text.
Okay.
So what happened?
Raise your hand first when we come back, okay? Here we go. So what happens? Murder. Vayomer Cain el Hevel achiv. The Cain said to Hevel, his brother. What did he say? We don't know. Vayihi b'yotam basadeh, vayakam Cain el Hevel achiv, va'yahargehu. So when they were in the field, Cain raised up on his brother Hevel and killed him. So there's that ellipsis there that you see in English. Cain said to his brother Abel, what did he say? Vayomer Adonai al Cain, e Hevel achicha, vayomer lo yadati.
See, that's the way of that.
All right, vayomer lo yadati, hashomer achi anochi. So God said to Cain, where is Hevel your brother? Not just where's Hevel your brother?
Hevel is always your brother at every moment. In fact, from the moment he was born, back in verse 4, he is called the brother Hevel. Each time.
And he said, I didn't know. Not I don't know, I didn't know. Lo yadati, am I my brother's keeper? Vayomer me asita, God says, what did you do? Kol demei achicha soakim elai. The voice of your brother's blood is crying out to me or screaming out to me, min ha'adama, from the ground. Or back to the ground. I go to the poem, you want to say something about this?
Yeah, I want to say, first of all, that as I said, that it's clear that the text wants us to know Hevel is his brother, and that's the problem, and that's the entire story. It's about brotherhood and its failure, or sibling, like family, and how it fails.
Lo yadati, I didn't know.
And then the lo
I
yadati comes back to the way it began was like Yedah Cain, right? That Adam Yadat at Chava Ishto, like the knowing that happened back in verse 1, which produced this situation, which was a knowing that was holy, is now undermined by the not knowing of moral, of immorality or moral, the feigned moral knowing or the
So
unknowing,
intimacy wasn't passed down.
right?
And that reminds me of like, what's this like Vayomer Kayin El Hevel? Like, what did he say to his brother Hevel? And it makes me think that in the context of like competition and rage and jealousy, no real communication is possible. You know, well, he didn't say anything because he wasn't actually talking to his brother because he didn't want to know his brother. So there's that emptiness there.
Well,
There's that emptiness.
Vayakam is from the same, Nekama, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know, I found the use of that word interesting because it was a vengeful killing. His anger was for him, not toward God.
Yes, right. Instead of taking it out on God, he takes it out on his brother.
And then also just wanted to go further, like the Lo Yadati here and its immediate following the word Hashomer brings us back to the Garden of Eden story, where the tree of knowledge of good and evil is in the garden. And as a direct result of that quote unquote sin of eating from it, right? They have knowledge, but now knowledge is perverted. And this is exactly the danger, as it were, that was implied in that capacity.
Well, knowledge isn't perverted, the absence of knowledge is the problem. Oh, yeah.
But not meaning knowledge itself as a dangerous gift, because knowledge is, or having knowledge and also its denial is a perversion of that gift. It becomes a gift. Knowledge is dangerous because you cannot know what you already know, right? To know is also to be responding to that knowledge. And here he not knows what he already knows. His lo yadati undermines the birth yada. Like he reverses. Yidiyah brings life, and here yidiyah and the lack thereof brings death. And then the word shmirah here is also the second time it's used in the Torah. The first time it was the Garden of Eden, right? God gives us a command early, lishomra ulavda, to guard over that innocence. And here he's completely, like he says, am I a guardian of that? It's like, it's just a complete and total. The story undoes it. And the last thing I'll say is also that the word voice here was used earlier, that God says the voice of your brother, the blood of your brother is calling to me a voice, which is again another moment of, in a text that is full of silence where we don't know what was spoken. Here there's a silent voice that God says, I hear. Right, I hear that voice. I know those voices, and it comes from Adamah, which is also the way that the whole story started. It was that Hevel, Cain worked the ground, right? But the very ground that he worked now is now, right.
It's interesting because here, and I actually learned this from our bat mitzvah girl today. Like God is the only one who seems to be grieving Hevel's death at this point. We're going to see a little bit more grief and how it's very subtly expressed on the part of Eve if we get there. But now the grief, like God's feeling the grief, God's hearing his voice. That's number one. And number two is, feels like here there's a recipe for violence. Like it's all the elements, like not wanting to know, like maybe all violence, I'm just trying this on, is a denial of knowing the other's humanity or knowing the other.
As your brother.
As your brother and as a human being.
And having a relationship.
And denying that one's a shomer, one's that,
And responsibility.
yeah.
The rabbis say that the word denay, the blood is bloods. It's not called damachita, the bloods of your brother, which is the future of
The generation.
the generation.
Right. Okay, wait, I want to read this poem and then we'll open, it's already 9:44. So this is a gorgeous poem by Don Pagis that my friend Rabbi Jack Mananical reminded me of this morning. And Don Pagis was a Holocaust survivor who moved to Israel. And he writes, כתוב בעיפרון בקרות החטאים. That's the name of it. כאן במשלוח הזה אני חזק עם הבל בני. אם תראו את בני הגדול קין בן אדם, תגידו לו שאני. Written in pencil in the sealed railway here in this parlor, I indeed with Abel my son, you've seen my other son, Cain, son of man. Tell him that I,
Wow.
yeah, this is a brutal poem, which is, obviously about the experience of, Jews during the Shoah, during the Holocaust. One more. Yeah, it's a very long ago. Reshit Rabbah. Okay, so what were they talking about? So Reshit Rabbah, Genesis Rabbah, the Midrash on Genesis has some interesting things to say about this. So Alma Hayu Midayanim, and what were they discussing? Amru, they said. Ba'u, so what were they discussing in the field? Because that whole discussion is missing. And they discuss Amru. Ba'u v'nachalok et ha'olam. Let's go and divide the whole world. Echad natal hakarkaot. One took the physical land. V'echad natal et hamital talim. And another one took all movable objects. Now we're going into not Talmudic Aramaic. So it says, this one said, the land on which you were standing is mine. That one said, what you are wearing is mine. That one said, take it off. This one said, fly. That's it. As a result, Cain rose up against Abel, his brother. So they start arguing about everything, right? And that seemed to do it, right? One said, why, right? Like, get out of here, I banish you. Okay, so now we'll go to another understanding. Rabbi Yeshua of Sichnin said in the name of Rabbi Levi, both of them took the immovable property, and both of them took the movable property. And what were they discussing in that case? So one said, in my land, Beit HaMikdash will be built. In my land, my property, Beit HaMikdash, the temple will be built. And then there's a proof text, which I'm going to skip. And let me just see if there's another interesting. Okay, we're going to go to Yehuda Bar Ami said they were quarreling over who would wed the first Eve. So they were quarreling about a woman, which perversely was their mother.
Basically, things
That we still
I've been fighting over for the last, right, power,
exactly.
lust, property, right,
Sacred land,
religion,
Mother.
mother, women. Okay.
electric complex, okay.
Okay. There's a lot of comments, so we're gonna stop right there. Okay, so there's Joe in the room, or so Joe in the room.
My brother Abe, my brother Nissim, or Abe, my brother. You look at the beginning, God already tells us how we're supposed to act in life. It's Achiv and then it's Hevel. And then when he goes on after everything else, it goes the other way. It's Hevel Achiv. When you always look at things at first, my brother, you never come to the Hevel Achiv because my brother, so jealous, always on what's back. And I think that's really
The way it
shifts. And that's how it starts that way always. And always you think that way, you direct everybody in life. It's my brother, not just my brother, my brother, the name. And when you look at the name, then you can come to not such great things in life.
Let you call on people.
Not great. So Theo, we're not gonna get to the punishment, so I wanna bracket that, because the punishment is, wandering and like, we're not gonna have a chance to really talk about the punishment.
Like,
But the-
curious to me about is God's logic, right? So like, when Adam and Eve are put in the Garden of Eden, right? We're told not to eat from the tree of knowledge. And we do, and we're supposed to die, and we don't die. And then God says to these nobles, whoever they are, right, or whoever he's talking to, that we have to throw them out because they might eat from the tree of life, but never says not to eat from the tree of life.
It only becomes important once they eat from the tree of knowledge, not even.
Right, because maybe they didn't know, but had they eaten from the tree of life first, right, like, shouldn't have both of them have been not, permitted?
Well, it says in the Torah that the problem is if they have knowledge and immortality, they'll be like God.
Okay,
But with only one, they're not gonna be like God.
okay,
They can't have both.
okay. So it was okay.
Mm.
All right. And then
It wasn't an issue until they had knowledge.
and then God said he's gonna kill us for eating, or kill Adam and Eve for eating if it doesn't do that. Doesn't kill Cain,
Isn't it that they'll kill, he says, most of them will
you'll
die.
surely die.
You-
However,
you-
But in
Which
a
means that-
1,000
right.
years.
Yeah.
All right, the broader question, I mean, it's like, Rashid is a book that we should learn in its entirety slowly. I've said that for years, David Kirk always says we should do it. I don't know when, but maybe we will one day. All right, Alina has had her hand up for quite a while, Alina J, and then we'll come back into the room. Alina?
Sometimes I think that the whole thing is God's existential question of like oneness. Now we separate out of oneness so we can know ourselves, and how can we, it's a riddle. To know ourselves, you can't have non-oppositions if you're going to know yourself. The whole planet is based on, night and day, black and white. You can't, existence in the sense of knowing it objectively requires this kind of opposition. So it's kind of a riddle. And I often think it's sort of that we are sort of God's question. That's all I say.
What a beautiful image, Alina. Thank you.
Jay, go ahead.
Hi, I have a question, but by the way, the Pagas poem is referencing an older poem, I believe, by Sutskever. So it should, just to put that out there. I have a question about verse 9, and it could be my ignorance of biblical Hebrew, but if I'm onto something, that might be interesting, which is verse 9 is all in the present tense, except the answer is lo yadati. What tense is yadati? In verse 9, the important verse there.
Ongoing, not knowing.
It could be both. It's the simple meaning, I think, is that it's the past.
Yeah, so that's interesting that it's in the past. It reminds me of almost like somebody who's got such a guilty conscience. What didn't he know? Right? I'm not sure he's answering. I don't know where my brother is, because of course he knows. There's something about what happened in what he did that's bothering him. It's almost like that guilty conscience kind of thing. Because why would it be in the past? In the context that I don't know where he is. Am I his keeper? The fact that suddenly it's in the past, there's something there for me.
It's interesting. Reminds me of a child like, well, you didn't tell me. I didn't know, right?
Right.
Like, I was supposed to be my brother's keeper. What?
And I just want to bring back also, again, I think the Torah speaks into, literarily by repeating verbs. And I think that the whole question of knowledge leading towards children and the risk of children and the risk of life itself is at play. And that when he says lo yadati, I think midrashically he's essentially saying, I just undid that knowing that my parents did, which was to bring life into the world. Like I'm not interested in the brotherhood that you've asked me. It's too painful. And lo yadati, I took matters into my own hands. Like I'm not knowing, meaning I'm undoing that knowing, that birthing, right? That birthing is something that I will undo. I don't want to be the guardian for my brother. I don't want to have to deal with the garden that it could potentially bring. It's too much suffering. I think there's something there. Obviously, grammatically, I agree with you on a Freudian level. He's probably playing his hand and telling us. I mean, of course, whenever God asks, a character question in the Genesis in our midst, like, where are you? Ayeka is like, really giving him a chance to come clean, but he doesn't, obviously. Yeah. So in the room, I know that we have a couple of people. Thanks, Jay. We have, I thought I saw Do we have any time for anybody else? One, just for the poem, because it's late.
It's 9:55, I get it.
I'm so sorry. Nothing personal. And I also have to leave because I have to go to the department.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're finished.
so
Go ahead.
thank you, everybody. So I'm gonna
Thank you.
bring us to source 9, just so we can see Eve's grief and how it's embedded in the aftermath of this text. So it says, "Vayada Adam od et ishto." So Adam knew again, and there's the knowledge again, his wife. But Caleb ben, and she gave birth to a son, but to Klat Shemo Shet, and she called his name Shet. Why? Seth. He Shet li Elohim zera achar tachat hevel bihargo kan. Because God provided me another seed in replacement of Hevel, because Cain killed Hevel. So there's some recognition of the death and the loss here of her son. And then it says in the next verse, "U'leshetz gam hu yulad ben v'yikra et shemo Enosh, az uchal l'kro b'shem Adonai." And to Seth in turn a son was born, and he named him Enosh. It was then that Adonai began to be invoked by name. And this is really a beautiful verse that our mitzvah student will talk about later. But I wanted to just highlight Eve's grief in this concluding poem. So this is a poem I just came across, and the whole poem can be accessed at this website here. And it says, I'm going to read the last stanza. Abel, you fell like unripe fruit cast down by the wind, no, not from the tree of life, not by wind, but by your own brother's hand. My son, each not knowing death, did Cain know what he had done to you? I like to think not. I should like to eat this fruit as I did the last. My teeth meet blood. It spilled warm and thick across my tongue. Nothing like the juice of an apple. God had said, on the day you eat of the fruit, you shall die, but I knew not what death was then, and now with 2 sons gone, I might like to. The blood drips down my chin, congealed, juice gone too soon from the fruit of your body. I want to end with a little bracha, a little blessing. So the end of Deuteronomy says that God knew Moshe face to face. And we knew that Moses couldn't see God face to face, right? But the end of, the Torah is extraordinary, but God knew Moshe face to face. Like we end with knowledge, we end with intimacy, and we start the Torah again with intimacy and knowledge being a problem and a source of violence. And here it's so sad that because of what's happening in the world and our fears of security, we can't see each other's faces. But I think that there's something in Torah study that gives us that face-to-face encounter. And I hope and pray for all of us that knowledge of the other and the face-to-face encounter and that intimacy will be restored. And that the image of God will be restored amongst us.
Amen.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.